Hey everyone, what's up? This is Uri for Gorilla Poker. This video is going to be a bit of a concept video. I'm going to show you guys a hand that Brad Owens played in one of his recent video logs that got me thinking about the concept of capped ranges and the history of capped ranges and what are the different ways to approach it. I think the hand itself was pretty cool, so I'm going to show you guys a hand and talk a bit about how the dynamics work in that spot.
I've got King Jack of Diamonds in the hijack. Looks so nice. I raised to 120. The big blind is the only customer. We're heads up in position. The dealer puts out ace 10-5, all diamonds. We flop the nuts, and we've got the royal flush redraw. The opponent checks. My hand is almost too strong. 4 of the 5 highest diamonds are all accounted for. There's not a whole lot that I'll be able to get called by on this board. I check back to set the trap. The turn is the 8 of hearts. The big blind might have something, or he could be getting out of line. He bets 320. No more slow playing for me. It's time to make a move. I raise to 1,000. The opponent doesn't look like he wants to fold. Maybe he has a smaller flush, a set, 2 pair, or maybe he just doesn't believe me and has 1 pair. The big blind calls. This has become a large pot. I'm just hoping that we get a clean run out. Instead, the river is the 5 of spades. It pairs the board. I no longer have the nuts. I'm having flashbacks to a session at 1020 that I recently played in which I flopped a king high flush, someone backdoored a boat, and I doubled them up. That kind of thing doesn't happen that often. I don't necessarily need to be worried about it. The big blind checks. Checking back my hand would be ridiculous. There are a variety of strong but worse hands that can call it bet. I go with my instincts that I'm best, and I make it 2,000 to mostly target smaller flushes, but also some hands like ace 10 and ace 8. The opponent has 4,090 total. There's only one thing that I don't want to hear, and that's...
Okay, so this is a point in the hand in which we're going to pause. And I think it's a really good point to talk about capped and uncapped ranges, and I'll start out by making a few assumptions regarding the situation and the ranges. So I'm going to assume that Brad Owens' range on the river, the way he played the hand, he checks back flop, raises a turn and bets the river big, that his range is going to be only flushes and bluffs, but never ever a boat. I don't think he's likely to check back a set, and I don't think he's very likely to raise a turn set of 8s. So for argument's sake, we'll say that Brad is capped at having flushes, which means that his hand, King Jack of Diamonds, is actually basically his entire range. For all intents and purposes, he's always going to have a flush. Brad's opponent, on the other hand, we're going to assume that to check shove the river, he needs to have a boat, so he's going to have a boat or a bluff. In this situation, we tend to say that Brad is capped at a flush, his opponent is uncapped, and these tend to be very unpleasant situations, especially with a lot of money behind. Now, I'm going to walk you guys a bit through the history of the dynamics of this kind of spot, which I think is extremely important to understand now. History in poker is important because the way we maximize our win rate is by understanding our opponent as much as we can. And even if we studied solvers and solutions and we studied the Gorilla Poker Redline course and all the GTO Gorilla Poker preflop ranges that you can find on our website, even if you studied all of those and all the up-to-date poker theory, maybe your opponent hasn't yet done that. And then he's perceiving things differently, he's playing differently, and you can maximize your win rate by understanding the level that he's playing and thinking at. So the history of capped ranges used to be, and this is if you go, say, 10 years back or 12 years back or so, nobody really bluffed enough. So whenever you faced a really big bet with a capped range, you would tend to fold. It used to be a good play, and some players, me included, guilty as charged, did take a lot of advantage of this tendency where, you know, if my opponent could never have trips and I could, my stack was going in and people were folding left and right. And this created kind of an unbalanced dynamic where if you were aware of people's tendencies to always fold when capped, you would just always bluff when they're capped and make a lot of money and they would get run over. Now this developed over the years into a concept called top of my range I call. Now the idea is to stop yourself from getting run over when you're capped, you have to call something, right? Brad's never going to have a boat, he has to call something. So the concept top of my range I call came to protect yourself from people who are running you over and say, you know, I'm just going to call just enough of my range to stop my opponent from profitably bluffing. Once that line is drawn, sure, sometimes you're going to stack me, but you're not going to profitably bluff me, let's say. And a way to calculate where this line is using pot odds. In this situation, for example, Brad's opponent, if he's bluffing, he's risking 4,000 to win 4,300. So that's roughly a pot-sized bet. That would mean Brad needs to defend roughly half of his range. Another way to look at it would be Brad's opponent called, so all of Brad's bluffs lose. Then after that, his opponent bet roughly 1/3 pot, and against a 1/3 pot bet, you need to defend 75% of your range. But then it would be of your value range. So in this sense, top of my range argument would have Brad defend river with 75% of his flushes and fold the other 25%. And here you guys have both approaches, right? On the one hand, Brad can decide to just fold everything because he's only beating a bluff. On the other hand, he can go like the balanced GTO kind of thing of defending top 75% of his range and fold a quarter of his flushes. If his range is always flushes, maybe he uses some element of randomization to decide whether or not to call or fold. Now, if you take like one step further in history, we'd have solvers. Solvers get the math a bit better than I just did, and they make your range a bit less capped. But still, you still have this dynamic of being capped a lot, so they don't really add that much to the capped versus bluff catcher dynamic. So what should Brad do in terms of history? And here you need to decide, in my eyes, once you understand the dynamics and the reasons. You have a bluff catcher, you're allowed to fold it. And then, is this a spot where it's important to you to stop your opponent from profitably bluffing? Or is this a spot where you would rather say, I don't think people bluff enough, I'm just going to fold anything? Looking at the way this hand played out, Brad's opponent potted the turn, called a big raise, and then did this like suicide check shove on the river with Brad having only 2k behind. It's just tough to imagine what he could even be bluffing with. He can't have a draw because Brad has the king of diamonds. What could he have? Ace of hearts, queen of diamonds, check raise bluff the river, ace 10, check raise bluff the river. I think those are unlikely enough for me. Me personally, this is a spot where I wouldn't worry about drawing the line in the sand. And I'd think of this as, I'm folding my entire range. It's so exploitable, but this is kind of like running a red light when all the cops are on vacation in a different country and there are no cars in a 100-mile radius. Like it's all right. You can run the red light. So yeah, it's something very exploitable to do, the correct GTO play with no information. I don't know how good or bad my opponent is, would be to call most of the time. But I think this is one of those spots that, and I think personally kind of obviously so, or if you agree with my assumptions that Brad's opponent would never shove a worse flush and that it's very difficult to find bluffs here, this is just a very straightforward fold. That being said, let's see what Brad does.
It seems like I've fallen into my own trap. If I call, this is going to be a pot of over $10,000, by far the largest one that I've ever played. I knew it was dangerous betting because with the board pairing, not only could the opponent have improved to have me beat, but I was pretty much only repping flushes with my turn raise after I checked back the flop. Almost never have a full house given how this has been played because I would have bet flop with sets and 2-pair hands. My range is capped. There's a small possibility the big blind is doing this with a worse flush for value. I doubt he'd do this as a bluff, but I guess there's a tiny chance of that as well. I come to the realization that it's only about 2,000 more. I'm getting 4-1, and I can't fold for that price.
I guess I call, man. You got it. Yep. I've just gotten so fucked. Goddamn. How much? Backdoor boat again. Happened to me so much lately.
No bet on the flop?
No bet on the flop.
Didn't bet on the flop, and I get absolutely punished for it. The big blind has pocket eights for a full house. He turned a set and got there on the river. I had a 97.2% chance of winning on the flop. I get a nightmare run out, and I lose the maximum to get totally annihilated. I have less than 3,000 in my stack. I'm down 7,000 for this game. It's clearly not my day.
We'll stop there. I will say that it's a great episode to watch. Brad did end up, I think, even booking a small win, if I'm not mistaken, by the end of the session. I found this hand really interesting, both because of the historical perspective, but also even nowadays, If you ask people what would they do with the nut flush, there are some people who would snap fold, and there are some people who would call 75% of the time, and there would be some people who are like, nut flush, I never fold this hand. I think kind of looking at the different perspectives and thinking where this fits in, and even just understanding, right, that even from the GTO perspective, you get to fold a quarter of the time, and then deciding whether you actually, you don't even have to say I'll fold all of them. You can be less extreme and be like, I should fold 25%, but I think my opponent's unlikely to be bluffing, so I'll fold 50%. I would say that's where the heart and soul of poker is, in looking at these situations, understanding, but trying to read your opponent, right? To understand whether he's going to bluff enough, where his thresholds are going to be, and adjust based on that. That's where you can get the big edges after, you study theory and know how to play kind of ABC poker. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you would like to see more of these types of videos in the future, or have a specific hand you want me to look at, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.